What if one wrong email could change the course of your life forever? Grace Bennett never imagined her private struggles caring for her ailing father, grieving the loss of her firefighter husband, balancing low-wage jobs would land in the inbox of Alex Whitmore, the most powerful man in Boston. He had everything: wealth, legacy, influence. She had little more than resilience and a tired smile. But when their worlds collided, it wasn't money or fame that spoke. It was something quieter: a forgotten locket, a ramp built in the snow, a kiss offered not as escape, but as courage. Could two lonely people, standing on opposite sides of privilege, truly build a life together? Could trust grow again after betrayal, when silence had almost torn them apart? And what does it mean to love not in grand gestures, but in the daily acts that heal? This is not just a story of romance. It's about respect, fairness, and the bravery to choose kindness when the world demands otherwise. If you believe in second chances, in love that heals rather than dazzles, then stay with us. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in small miracles, and subscribe to Shining Stories as we begin Just One Kiss. The billionaire begged, and the secretary couldn't resist his love. The morning had started with snowflakes, light as feathers, drifting down over Boston's financial district. The city wore a thin white coat, the kind that made sidewalks slippery and slowed everyone's pace. Grace Bennett tugged at her old knit gloves, damp at the fingertips, as she hurried up the stone steps of the Whitmore Foundation. The brownstone building stood solid and dignified among steel towers, as if reminding the city that history could still anchor progress. Grace had left her apartment before sunrise, carrying the weight of two worlds. At home, her father had needed coaxing through breakfast, his memory dimming more with each season. She had sat him at the kitchen table, reminded him gently to eat his oatmeal, written out his pills in neat rows. Then she rushed out the door, praying he would not forget to lock it behind her. At work, she had to be polished, dependable, invisible in her efficiency. The distance between those worlds could be crossed in a subway ride, but never felt shorter than a mile of heartbreak. In her hurry, Grace tapped out emails on her phone as she stood in the crowded lobby. She balanced her tote bag, brushed melting snow from her coat sleeve, and tried to finish a draft meant for herself, a private log she kept about her father's care. It held notes about medication costs, insurance claims, and her own thoughts scribbled after sleepless nights. It was not meant for anyone's eyes, but her own. Her thumb slipped, one wrong touch. The draft, attached with a spreadsheet of bills and a page of personal reflection, slid into the outbox. By the time the elevator doors opened, the email had traveled across the building's secure server and landed in the inbox of the man who owned not just this foundation, but more pieces of Boston than she could imagine. Alexander Whitmore. On the top floor, in an office paneled with polished oak, Alex leaned back in his chair, sifting through morning correspondence. The snow outside softened the skyline, making even the glass towers seem less severe. He had grown used to reports filled with numbers, projections, and carefully tailored requests for funding. He clicked through each one with practiced attention. Then his eyes stopped. The subject line was nothing more than Tuesday notes. The sender, his temporary secretary, Grace Bennett. He remembered her faintly brown hair tied back too tightly. Quiet presence, eyes downcast during meetings. He opened the message expecting an attachment about scheduling or donor contacts. Instead, the words were raw. Dad forgot the door again this morning. I found the key in the freezer. I'm scared to leave him, but I have to keep this job. Rent is late. Insurance rejected another claim. Some days I wonder if I am strong enough. But then he smiles at me, and I remind myself that love is stronger than memory loss. I just have to believe that. Alex read the lines twice. Then he opened the spreadsheet attached. Rows of expenses, highlighted in yellow, revealed more than any resume could. Medication, rent, food measured by dollars and cents. Notes scribbled in the margins: stretch paycheck, skip coat this year, don't let Dad see worry. He set his coffee down slowly. In the polished silver frame on his desk was a photo of his mother, her smile bright in a garden long gone. He remembered how, toward the end, she had struggled with the same confusion Grace described. He remembered being a young man trying to juggle school, responsibility, and grief while the rest of the world assumed his wealth could protect him from pain. Wealth had never shielded him from emptiness. The email was not a request. It was not even addressed to him. It was a window left open by accident, showing a life both fragile and fierce. Alex's instinct could have been to delete it, to preserve her dignity by pretending he had never seen it. But his hand moved instead to mark the message, saving it in a private folder. He made a note in his calendar, meet with Grace, not for reprimand, not for protocol, but to answer her unspoken words with something more than silence. Downstairs. Grace hurried through the marble hall, unaware of the slip. She adjusted her gloves, greeted the receptionist with a thin smile, and walked toward the elevators. Her thoughts spun around her father's morning confusion. She replayed the moment when he had asked where her mother was, though she had been gone for more than a decade. Grace had smiled, dodged the question, and guided him to the oatmeal. Each day was a patchwork of tiny heartbreaks, stitched with determination. The elevator dinged. She stepped inside, pressing the button for her floor. The car was nearly full, filled with professionals clutching briefcases and coffee cups, voices low but urgent. Grace clutched her tote to her chest, her heart still racing from the morning. She had no idea that, several floors above, the man everyone in Boston referred to simply as Whitmore was reading her private words with a furrowed brow, not of annoyance but of recognition. He thought of the way the world often looked at him, decisive, untouchable, all sharp edges and power. Yet here, in a misdirected email, was something he could not ignore, vulnerability paired with quiet strength. The clock on his desk ticked. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the city's noise. Inside, Alex leaned forward, elbows on his desk, the photo of his mother watching silently as if urging him to respond, not with wealth, but with humanity. He closed his laptop and sat back. Something about Grace's words had stirred the ache he kept hidden beneath layers of success. He felt the quiet pull of empathy, unexpected and insistent. He told himself he would find the right time to address it, not as a superior, not as a benefactor, but as a man who understood. For now, he let the moment linger. Down in the elevator, Grace adjusted her scarf, unaware that her day was about to tilt. The car jolted once, then again, and came to a halt between floors. The alarm bell chimed, shrill against the close air. People gasped, muttered, pressed the emergency button. Grace steadied herself, hand against the cold rail, her thoughts leaping instantly to her father at home. Panic brushed her chest, but she drew a breath, willing calm. She had been through worse mornings, somewhere above. Alex rose from his chair at the sound of the building's fire alarm test, unaware that, within minutes, chance would bring him and Grace into the same corridor, bound not by mistake, but by circumstance. Every person carries a private loneliness, the kind that can't always be read in their face. Grace Bennett carried hers like a hidden stone in her pocket. To the outside world, she was just another woman crossing Boston streets in her scuffed boots, holding her tote close as if it carried her entire life. To Alex Whitmore, loneliness came wrapped in privilege, the kind that polished surfaces and high windows could never erase. Grace had been born in Dayton, Ohio, in a modest neighborhood where porches creaked in the summer heat and everyone knew who had baked a pie for the church fair. Her childhood was steady, grounded in small rituals, Sunday pancakes, helping her mother fold laundry, watching her father oil the hinges on the old screen door. She never expected life to change so drastically. When she was 27, she married Daniel, a firefighter whose smile filled every room he entered. They dreamed of saving for a small house with a wide yard. But 5 years ago, sirens wailed for him one final time. A collapsing roof had taken him in an instant, leaving Grace with nothing but a folded flag and a grief that moved in like a tenant who refused to leave. Boston was never part of her plan. She came here because her father needed a treatment program for early dementia that wasn't available in Ohio. The specialists were here, along with the long waiting lists, the endless bills, the subway rides she learned to navigate by sheer necessity. She rented a modest apartment with squeaky floors, close enough to the hospital that she could rush over if the nurses called. Her job at the Whitmore Foundation wasn't glamorous. It was a temporary role, filling in as a secretary, scheduling meetings, answering calls. She did her work quietly, never drawing attention. At night, she worked a few hours at a used bookstore near Beacon Hill, dusting shelves, ringing up paperbacks for students. It gave her extra income, barely enough, but also a strange sense of comfort. Among rows of secondhand novels, she dreamed of something of her own, a letterpress shop where people could come to write and print messages of kindness. She wanted a space where words could heal, not just fill screens. Meanwhile, on the top floor of that brownstone, another kind of loneliness watched the snow fall. Alexander Whitmore was the son of a family that had been part of Boston's fabric for generations. The Whitmores had their names etched on university halls, hospital wings, and museum plaques. His life had been gilded since birth prep schools, Harvard, boardrooms, but the glitter carried weight. From an early age, Alex had been restless with expectations. He wanted to build something meaningful, not simply preserve the wealth he had inherited. His passion drew him to clean energy ventures. While his family looked to protect old investments, Alex pushed towards solar farms, wind turbines, and research grants. It earned him both admiration and criticism. Admirers called him visionary. Detractors whispered that he was reckless, too idealistic. What they didn't see was the cost years of insomnia, nights pacing a penthouse with city lights burning against his windows. Success didn't silence the emptiness he felt when he remembered his mother's last years. She had suffered a stroke that left her fragile and forgetful. He was just a young man then, but he remembered the way she looked to him for guidance, like a child seeking a parent. He remembered spooning broth into her mouth, remembering her medication schedule, feeling helpless even in a house filled with resources. The only object of hers he still kept close was a silver locket, tarnished at the edges, the clasp broken. It lay in his desk drawer, hidden but never forgotten. Sometimes, when he felt the city closing in, he would hold it in his palm, tracing the dent where the metal had cracked. The misdirected email from Grace had stirred something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the bills and the hardship, it was the way she had written about her father. Love is stronger than memory loss. That line struck him like a bell. He had once believed the same about his mother. He had once been the young man scribbling notes on medication times, wondering if he could endure another day of watching someone he loved slip away. Alex leaned back in his chair, staring out the tall windows toward the Charles River. Snow blurred the edges of the skyline. He thought of Grace downstairs, typing quietly, invisible to the bustling foundation. How many people had passed her by without ever guessing the weight she carried? He could have ignored it. He could have treated it as a private accident, as if nothing had reached him. But the truth was, her words had lodged in him. They had cracked open a memory he had spent years sealing shut. At the hospital that afternoon, Grace hurried to check on her father. She guided him through the sterile halls, holding his arm gently, introducing herself to him again when he blinked with confusion. Later, on her way home, she walked past the Charles, the icy river catching the dimming light. She thought of her letterpress dream, half-formed, tucked away like a seed waiting for spring. In his office, Alex opened the locket again, the hinge stiff from disuse. He pressed the broken clasp shut and whispered an old promise to himself to do more than sign checks, to see the people behind the causes. Grace's accidental confession had reminded him why he had started this path in the first place. The next morning, the foundation scheduled a fire safety drill. Staff would be guided through procedures, elevators paused, alarms tested. Alex looked at the note on his calendar and made a quiet decision. He wanted to see Grace not as a secretary who made a clerical error, but as a person who had reminded him of his own humanity. He would pay attention at that drill, The snow outside kept falling, silent and persistent, as if insisting that all things could be covered and then revealed again. The morning drill began like any other routine announcement. A message echoed through the Whitmore Foundation Hall's fire safety test at 10 o'clock. Please follow staff instructions. Most employees glanced up from their screens with mild irritation. Already planning to use the interruption to grab coffee, Grace Bennett, however, tightened her scarf and prepared herself for the disruption. She never liked alarms or confined spaces. They made her feel the way she did in hospital corridors, trapped by circumstances she couldn't control. She stepped into the elevator with a group of staff, including an elderly board member leaning on a cane. The man looked uneasy even before the bell sounded. Grace positioned herself near him instinctively, ready in case the drill proved more stressful than intended. The elevator rose smoothly for a moment, then jolted. A metallic shudder rattled through the walls. Suddenly it stopped between floors. The lights flickered once before steadying into a dim glow. A sharp alarm wailed overhead. Gasps filled the car. Someone pressed the emergency button. The elderly man clutched his cane, his breathing shallow and fast. Grace bent toward him without hesitation. "Slow breaths," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. We'll be out soon." Her own heart thudded, but she had learned long ago that fear never helped anyone. Caregivers could not afford panic. She guided the man's breathing with calm gestures, steady as if she had practiced this countless times at home. In truth, she had. Every time her father grew anxious, every time confusion took hold, she became both anchor and guide. The others in the elevator began to settle, following her lead. A younger employee shifted. Embarrassed by his own outburst, Grace simply gave him a reassuring nod. The alarm still rang, but the space no longer felt like chaos. Above, in the open atrium, Alex Whitmore stood watching the monitors. The safety team managed the drill, checking off procedures. But Alex's attention fixed on one small camera feed, an elevator stalled mid-level. He saw Grace inside, her hand steady on the board member's arm, her face composed. He had expected efficiency from her in the office. He had not expected this quiet authority, this instinct to comfort. Something in her posture reminded him of nights by his mother's bedside, when he had whispered reassurances even though he was barely more than a boy. He remembered the way she would calm at the sound of his voice, trusting him more than the doctors. A technician reset the system, and the elevator creaked back into motion. Minutes later, the doors opened at the lobby. Staff spilled out, shaking their heads at the inconvenience. The elderly man exhaled in relief, leaning on Grace's arm until he steadied himself. She walked him to a chair before stepping aside, as if her role had been nothing at all. Alex approached, though not directly. He lingered near the reception desk, his eyes following her. She was busy brushing dust from her coat, adjusting her tote bag. Then something slipped from his pocket unnoticed as he moved his mother's locket. It struck the floor with a faint metallic sound, rolling toward Grace's feet. She bent quickly, picked it up, and turned it in her hand. The silver was tarnished, the clasp broken. For a moment she held it with a reverence that surprised even her. It felt heavy with memory, as if carrying a story older than she could guess. She rubbed it gently with the edge of her scarf before looking around for the owner. Alex realized at once what had fallen. His chest tightened. That locket was the one piece of his past he guarded most fiercely. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You dropped this," Grace said, offering it with quiet respect. Their hands nearly touched as he took it back. He noted how she had polished a small smudge from its surface. For reasons he could not name, the simple act moved him deeply. "Thank you," he said, voice lower than he intended. He slipped the locket into his pocket, but the moment lingered. Later that day, Alex called Grace into his office. The fire drill was already forgotten by most, but not by him. He gestured for her to sit, his tone formal yet softened at the edges. "I've been reviewing our community initiatives," he explained. "We're expanding programs for dementia care, scheduling, Coordination, it's complicated. I'd like you to oversee the calendar. Grace blinked in surprise. Me? I'm only temporary staff. You've shown me something more important than titles, Alex replied. Calm under pressure, compassion. I need someone who understands what families are truly facing. The words unsettled her. She wondered if he knew more about her private life than he should. But his gaze held no hint of intrusion, only recognition. She nodded slowly, aware that refusing would draw more questions. When she left the office, the locket lingered in her thoughts. She wondered whose memory it held for him. She wondered if loss had touched even men who seemed untouchable. Alex closed the drawer after placing the locket back inside. His hand lingered on the wood. That small accident, like the misdirected email, had opened another door. Grace was not just a name on the payroll. She was someone whose presence carried echoes of his own past. The foundation halls buzzed with routine again, yet both of them carried something from that morning. For Grace, it was curiosity about a locket. For Alex, it was the certainty that her steadiness was no accident. The week ahead promised meetings and reports. Yet beneath the surface, a different calendar had begun. One that would bring them into the same rooms, the same projects, over and over. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both sensed it. Something had shifted. Some connections did not need words. A single gesture, small and thoughtful, could change the rhythm of an ordinary day. For Grace, it was a cup of chamomile tea that marked the beginning of something she could not quite name. The weeks after the fire drill settled into a quiet routine, Grace continued her work at the foundation, now balancing new responsibilities with the dementia care project. The assignment kept her close to Alex, though their interactions were wrapped in the formality of office life. She answered his questions with measured tones, kept her notes precise, and never lingered longer than necessary. But outside those walls, her evenings still belonged to simpler places. The used bookstore near Beacon Hill welcomed her most nights. But on Fridays she walked to a bakery tucked in Boston's North End. The owner, a cheerful woman named Rosa, let Grace work a few hours in exchange for modest pay and the occasional loaf of warm bread. There, in the glow of ovens and the scent of cinnamon, Grace found a pocket of peace. She would wipe counters, refill pastry trays, and talk with customers. Often, she shared little tricks she had learned from caring for her father, set alarms for medication. She would advise gently, keep a box of family photos nearby. Sometimes pictures unlock memories better than words. Her voice softened when she said these things, as if speaking them helped her believe she could endure another week. One evening, as she closed her ledger, she noticed Alex standing at the counter. His presence in the small bakery startled her. He seemed too polished for the flour-dusted space, his dark coat dusted with snow, but his expression was calm. "I thought you might like this," he said, holding out a cup. Steam curled from it, carrying the scent of chamomile. Grace accepted it slowly, the paper warm against her palms. "How did you know I didn't?" Alex admitted. "But you look like someone who doesn't sleep enough. Chamomile helps." For a moment, neither spoke. The bakery hummed around them, ovens cooling, Rosa chatting in the back. Grace lifted the cup, sipped, and felt the heat spread through her chest. She realized he was watching, waiting for her reaction with more care than she expected. "Thank you," she said at last. The next morning, during a meeting at the foundation, Alex glanced at her notebook as she organized schedules. A pressed maple leaf lay between the pages, its edges fragile but beautifully preserved. "You collect them?" he asked quietly when the room had emptied. Grace hesitated. "Only this one? It's from a trip I took with my father years ago, before things became harder." Alex nodded, respecting the pause in her words. "It's beautiful," he said simply. That was all. No probing, no pity, just acknowledgement. The exchange lingered with Grace through the day. She found herself replaying the quietness of his tone, the way he had offered tea without presumption, the way he had spoken of the leaf as if it were not trivial. In his presence, she felt seen, not as an employee or a burden, but as a woman carrying pieces of life that still mattered. Their interactions remained small, almost invisible to others. A door held open, a note passed with careful clarity, a pause in conversation where silence spoke more than words. Grace guarded those moments, even as she reminded herself of boundaries. She could not forget she was temporary staff. She could not afford dreams. But the world around them was not blind. Whispers began to drift through the foundation's halls. A wealthy man noticing a secretary was always fodder for speculation. Soon, murmurs reached the ears of reporters who lived on hints of scandal. The first article appeared on a small blog as Whitmore Foundation's director distracted. A photo taken outside the bakery showed Alex leaving with Grace a step behind, her scarf pulled high against the wind. The picture caught nothing improper, yet the headline colored it with implication. Grace's stomach twisted when she saw it. Panic pricked at her throat. She could not afford to lose this job. She had rent, hospital bills, a father depending on her. She imagined the board dismissing her with cold efficiency, all because of a rumor. That evening, she avoided Alex, slipping out of the office quickly. But the next morning, he stopped her in the corridor. His voice was low, steady. "There's a gala next week. I'd like you to come." Her eyes widened. That would only make things worse. "People already I know," he interrupted gently. "But this isn't about appearances. If you're there, beside me, it clarifies matters. It shows that I stand with you, not behind whispers." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. The thought of walking into a ballroom filled with cameras and polished guests terrified her. Yet the sincerity in his eyes steadied her. He was not inviting her for show. He was offering protection, a shield against stories that could unravel her fragile life. She did not answer immediately. She only nodded faintly, heart caught between fear and an unfamiliar flutter of hope. That night, back in her apartment, Grace placed the maple leaf on her nightstand. She traced its veins under the lamplight and thought of chamomile tea, of a man who noticed small things. She thought of whispers that could ruin her, and of the courage it might take to step into the spotlight beside him. The snow outside thickened, tapping gently against her window. Tomorrow would come with more rumors, more challenges. But the memory of warmth beneath bakery lights, and the possibility of standing together at the gala, carried her into restless dreams. The gala glowed like a golden lantern against the winter night. Strings of lights draped across the hotel ballroom, chandeliers scattering reflections onto polished floors. Music floated in from a live quartet, mingling with the murmur of Boston's most powerful voices. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne, and cameras flashed discreetly from the corners. Grace felt small when she stepped inside. Her dress was simple, a borrowed navy gown with sleeves she had altered herself. She had hesitated for hours before agreeing to come. Even now, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Every glance from the crowd seemed sharpened, every whisper a possible story. Alex greeted donors with practiced ease, his presence commanding without effort. But his gaze drifted often toward Grace, as though tethered by an invisible thread. When she caught his eyes, he offered a slight nod, steady and reassuring. It was enough to help her breathe. As the evening unfolded, the press slipped among the guests. Their lenses caught every smile, every tilt of Alex's head. Grace knew the photos would appear by morning, dressed in speculation. She braced herself, remembering rent due dates and hospital invoices stacked on her kitchen table. At one point, a reporter leaned too close, her voice laced with suggestion. "Mr. Whitmore, care to comment on the company you keep?" This evening Alex's reply was calm, his tone cutting through the noise. "Grace Bennett is a valued member of this foundation. Her insight into dementia care has already improved our outreach. I intend to make her role permanent in a new department where her skills belong." The reporter blinked, unprepared for the answer. Alex turned away, leaving no room for further question. His words rippled through the room, shifting the story from rumor to recognition. Later, when the music swelled and couples drifted toward the dance floor, Grace slipped outside for air. The cold night wrapped around her as she walked toward the terrace overlooking the Charles River. The railing was lined with frost, glittering under moonlight. She rested her hands on the icy metal, steadying herself. Moments later, Alex joined her. His coat collar was turned up against the wind, his breath visible in the chill. For a moment, they stood in silence, the city lights shimmering across the dark water. "You shouldn't have defended me like that," Grace said softly. "It only gives them more to talk about." Alex shook his head. "People will always talk. What matters is the truth. And the truth is, you deserve respect for your work, not whispers behind your back." She looked at him, trying to gauge the sincerity in his face. "But if this continues, it could damage your reputation." "I don't want to be the reason you won't be," he interrupted gently, "because I won't allow lines to blur unfairly. Tomorrow, I'll finalize your transfer to the Community Initiatives team. You won't report to me directly anymore." Grace's breath caught. "You're moving me. I'm protecting you," Alex said. "If we are to explore, whatever this is, it has to begin with fairness. I won't risk your dignity or your position, not for gossip. Not for anyone." The words settled between them, heavier than the frost. Grace turned her eyes back to the river. The air stung her cheeks, but inside, something warmer stirred. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say nothing," Alex replied. "Just know that I mean it." A quiet descended, filled only by the hum of traffic in the distance and the rustle of wind against bare branches. Grace tightened her fingers on the railing, then felt another hand cover hers. Alex's touch was steady, not demanding, not hurried. He let the weight of silence speak, showing her that respect could be as powerful as desire. Her heart raced anyway. She had not expected this gentleness, this careful drawing of lines that honored her fears instead of ignoring them. For the first time in years, she felt what it might mean to be seen not as fragile, not as replaceable, but as equal. Still, uncertainty clung to her. This could still end badly. She said, "It could," Alex admitted, "but it could also become something neither of us expected. I'd rather face the risk with honesty than hide behind walls built from fear." She studied his face, lit by the faint glow of the terrace lamps. There was no arrogance there, no entitlement, only a man trying to do right, even in a world that thrived on spectacle. Grace felt her throat tighten. She turned her hand beneath his, letting their fingers brush briefly before pulling back. It was not a rejection. It was an acknowledgement of the fragile ground they stood upon. "Tomorrow, then," she said, her voice almost lost to the wind. "Tomorrow." Alex agreed. They lingered there until the music from the ballroom shifted into a faster tempo, signaling the night's end. Grace knew the cameras would catch her leaving. That speculation would not vanish overnight, but, for the first time, she carried a small ember of hope, shielded carefully against the cold. Tomorrow, the paperwork would begin. A new department, a clearer boundary, perhaps even the start of something neither of them dared to name. The frost on the railing glistened as if keeping their secret. Healing does not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the form of a bowl of chicken soup, steaming gently on a winter table. Sometimes it glows from a small lamp that mimics the dawn, nudging a weary body toward rest. And often, it lives in the quiet presence of someone who listens without judgment. After the gala, true to his word, Alex arranged Grace's transfer to the Community Initiatives Division. The change removed her from his direct chain of command, giving her room to breathe. For Grace, the shift felt like both relief and challenge. She now coordinated programs that reached into Boston's neighborhood's meal deliveries, caregiver workshops, and partnerships with nursing homes. It was work that mattered deeply, but it demanded every ounce of her energy. On one brisk Saturday morning, she found herself in the Foundation's industrial kitchen, tying an apron while volunteers bustled around her. Alex was there too, sleeves rolled, ladle in hand. The sight made Grace pause. She had grown used to him in boardrooms and behind polished desks. Seeing him sprinkle parsley into a pot of broth was disarming. He caught her look and raised an eyebrow. "I was told I make decent soup," he said. Grace smiled despite herself. "We'll see about that." They worked side by side, chopping carrots, stirring pots, filling containers for delivery. Grace noticed how Alex listened when the older volunteers shared family recipes, jotting down tips on scraps of paper. She watched him laugh easily when broth splashed onto his cuff, unbothered by the stain. For a few hours, the weight of his last name seemed to slip away. Later, at a nursing home near Beacon Hill, Grace led a small activity for residents. She showed them how to fold laundry into neat stacks, a simple task that offered comfort and memory cues. Beside her, Alex helped an elderly man button a shirt, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Afterward, they gathered a group to write letters on thick paper, guiding wrinkled hands to shape words. Grace read one aloud, "To my daughter. I still remember your laugh." The room grew quiet, filled with the fragile power of connection. Alex's gaze lingered on Grace as she encouraged each resident, patient with every pause. He thought of her father, unseen yet present in every gesture she made. That evening, as they walked out together, the sky already dark, Alex stopped her at the curb. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a box no larger than a loaf of bread. She opened it to reveal a small sunrise lamp, its curved surface designed to glow gradually each morning. "For your father," Alex explained. "Light therapy can sometimes help regulate sleep. I read about it last week." Grace swallowed hard. No one outside her family had ever thought so practically, so tenderly, about her father's care. She pictured the lamp on his nightstand, coaxing him into calmer nights. Her voice caught as she said, "Thank you. He struggles most after sunset. This could help." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the city noise around them faded. Trust had begun to take root not in dramatic promises, but in these steady, ordinary offerings. Still, Grace kept her guard. She knew how fragile reputations could be, how quickly kindness might be twisted into suspicion. Even so, she allowed herself a rare sense of safety in Alex's presence, as though she could lean just slightly without fear of falling. The next week, their schedules crossed often. They attended planning sessions, visited community centers, and exchanged brief notes about logistics. Grace found herself looking forward to the moments in between, when silence stretched comfortably, when his glance held acknowledgement without demand. Yet, beneath the surface of the foundation, currents stirred. Grace noticed small oddities in her inbox, an email misfiled, a report marked with her name, though she had not prepared it. At first she dismissed it as clerical error, but one late evening, as she shut down her computer, she caught a message flashing across her screen. It bore her address, but originated from somewhere else within the system. The numbers inside the spreadsheet didn't add up. Funds shifted between accounts in ways that didn't match her projects. She frowned, unsettled. Closing the laptop, she told herself she would revisit it tomorrow. That night, at home, she placed the sunrise lamp in her father's room. When morning arrived, soft light spread across the faded wallpaper, painting warmth where shadows usually clung. Her father stirred, calmer than usual. Grace watched him with quiet gratitude, whispering a promise to herself to hold on to hope, however small. Meanwhile, in his office, Alex traced the locket in his drawer with his thumb. He thought of Grace's smile when she saw the lamp, of the way she carried burdens without asking for help. He wanted to shield her from the storms that came with his family's name. Neither of them knew that another storm was already brewing, hidden in lines of data, ready to test the fragile trust they had built. Sometimes ruin arrives quietly, carried not by storms, but by spreadsheets. The first whispers came on a Tuesday morning. Grace noticed colleagues avoiding her eyes. By lunch, emails buzzed through the foundation like hornets. A data leak had surfaced, showing irregular transfers in community project accounts. The figures painted a damning picture: money missing, documents signed under her login. Grace stared at the screen in disbelief. Line after line bore her name, her password, her timestamp. She knew she hadn't touched those numbers, but in the cold clarity of data, denial seemed weightless. That afternoon, She was called upstairs. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Gregory Whitmore, Alex's cousin and the foundation's CFO, sat at the end of the table, lips pressed into a thin smile. He tapped a stack of printed spreadsheets with deliberate emphasis. "These records don't lie," he said smoothly. "The misallocations are extensive. All roads point to Miss Bennett." Grace's hands trembled. This isn't me. Someone used my account." Gregory arched an eyebrow. "Convenient?" Across the table, Alex leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Enough. We need to investigate fully before casting judgment." But the damage had begun. The press caught the scent within hours. Headlines spread, "Billionaire's protege." Accused of misusing charity funds. Photographers waited at the building's entrance. Grace felt the sting of flashbulbs as she left, her scarf pulled high to hide her face. The board issued a statement. Grace Bennett was placed on temporary leave pending investigation. The words temporary and pending rang hollow. To the public, suspension meant guilt. At home, Grace found her father struggling. He had slipped in the bathroom, leaving a bruise along his temple. She lifted him gently, her arms shaking with more than effort. As she settled him into bed, tears pricked her eyes. The scandal, the bills, the fear it all pressed down like stone. She called Alex that night, her voice breaking. "I can't stay here. My father needs me. Ohio is simpler. I'll take him home." There was a long silence on the line. Then Alex said softly, "Grace, running won't clear your name. I don't care about my name anymore," she whispered. "I care about surviving." The next morning, she typed her resignation, her fingers numb. She packed her bags quietly, folding clothes with mechanical precision. Among her few belongings, she placed the broken silver locket Alex had once dropped. She had kept it these past weeks, intending to repair it before returning it to him. Now it felt like the only unfinished thread binding them. Meanwhile, at the foundation, Alex confronted Gregory in private. "You engineered this," Alex said, voice low with fury. Gregory smirked. "Careful, cousin. Numbers are numbers. They don't bend for sentiment. She was a liability, and you let her too close. This is business." Alex's fists clenched, but he held himself still. He knew Gregory had resources, influence, and the ability to bury evidence deep. Yet his conscience burned. He had seen Grace in moments no spreadsheet could measure: steady in a stalled elevator, kind in a bakery, tireless beside the elderly. That woman could not be the thief these papers described. Still, the board demanded answers, and the public demanded blood. Alex stood at a crossroads, torn between loyalty to his family's empire and loyalty to the truth he felt in his bones. By evening, Grace was gone. The apartment she had rented stood bare. Neighbors watched silently as she loaded her father into a modest car. Snow fell again, dusting the windshield, blurring the city behind her. At her side, in the pocket of her coat, rested the locket. She traced its cracked clasp with her thumb as she drove west. Whispering a farewell she could not speak aloud. Back in Boston, Alex returned to his office. Grace's desk downstairs was empty, her chair pushed neatly under the table as though she had simply stepped out for coffee. The absence struck him harder than any headline. He opened his drawer and held his mother's photo, the frame cool against his hand. For the first time in years, Alex felt powerless. Wealth could silence stories, fund lawyers, rebuild reputations. But it could not erase the hollow left by a woman walking away with his locket in her pocket and his faith still tethered to her name. The night stretched long, the city humming outside his windows. On his desk, the spreadsheets waited like an accusation. On his heart, a question lingered heavier than all the numbers: would he choose family loyalty, or fight for the truth he believed in? The office lights dimmed automatically, but Alex remained at his desk, staring at the empty chair across from him, realizing that silence had never felt so loud. When every door in the city shuts, sometimes the only path left is the road back home, the road to the place where beginnings were made and where someone still needs you. Grace drove through miles of gray fields, the snow thinned by wind, fences leaning from years of weather. The road signs felt both familiar and foreign. She had not expected to return to Ohio like this defeated, carrying shame as well as responsibility. Yet at her side sat her father, drowsy in the passenger seat, his hand occasionally twitching as if reaching for memories he could no longer grasp. Their old house waited at the edge of town, its roof patched with tar, gutters sagging with ice. The porch creaked under her boots as she unlocked the door. Inside, dust had gathered during their months away. She set her father in his chair by the window, covering him with the plaid blanket he loved. The first week was survival. Pipes groaned, radiators barely warmed the rooms, and she spent long nights boiling water on the stove to bathe her father. Bills piled quickly. She counted what little she had and realized it would not stretch far. One afternoon, she opened a small box from the back of her dresser. Inside lay her wedding ring, the band worn thin but still shining faintly. She held it in her palm, remembering Daniel's laugh, the vows spoken with hope. Then she closed her fingers and walked to the pawn shop downtown. The money she received was less than she hoped, but enough to cover a month of medication. In Boston, Alex fought his own winter. The board of the Whitmore Foundation gathered in stern meetings, their voices sharp. Gregory sat at the head of finance reports, wielding numbers like weapons. Alex pressed for transparency, for time to investigate, but the others cautioned him. Any open conflict damages us all. One warned, your silence is necessary. Silence. It burned worse than accusation. He wanted to call Grace, to explain, to tell her he believed in her. Yet each time he lifted the phone, he lowered it again. Words felt useless against the machinery of his family's power. So he stayed quiet, and the distance grew colder. Back in Ohio, Grace created a routine. She rose before dawn, fed her father toast and tea, and sat with him through restless hours. On good mornings, he remembered her name. On harder ones, he called her Mary, his late wife's name. Grace never corrected him. She only smiled and held his hand. One afternoon, as snow drifted past the window, an envelope arrived. It was from a family whose mother had attended one of her foundation workshops in Boston. The letter thanked Grace for teaching their children how to write simple notes to comfort her in her illness. You may not remember us, it read, but your kindness made her final weeks gentler. Grace pressed the letter to her chest. For the first time in days, warmth broke through the gray. She thought of the residents at the nursing home, of folding shirts with trembling hands, of guiding pens across paper. Maybe her name in Boston was tarnished, but her work had mattered. That knowledge became her anchor. Yet the weight of betrayal lingered. She had trusted the system, believed in the Foundation's mission. Now she saw how easily innocence could be twisted by data, how fragile dignity was in the hands of those with power. She told herself she would not hope again. And still, at night, when her father slept, she caught herself staring at the broken locket on her nightstand, tracing its crack, remembering the look in Alex's eyes when he said he would protect her in Boston. Alex walked the city streets alone. He thought of Ohio more often than he admitted, of the snow-laced fields she had described, of the strength she carried into every room. He knew he had failed her, not by betrayal, but by silence. Still, he searched for a path back, though every corridor in his own building seemed lined with locked doors. What neither of them knew was that hope had already begun to move quietly. In a corner office, a young IT intern combed through the server logs. He was new, unnoticed, his desk piled with forgotten equipment. But he had seen patterns in the data that did not fit logins made when Grace was not in the building. IP addresses routed through unusual servers. He saved copies, marking them with timestamps. He said nothing yet, waiting until he was sure. In Ohio, the days shortened further, the sky often the color of tin. Grace carried firewood to the porch, shoveled the path, and cared for her father with steady patience. But inside, she wrestled with a question. Was her life meant only for endurance, Or could she still believe in something larger? One evening, she lit the sunrise lamp Alex had given her. Its soft glow filled the small bedroom, casting golden light over the worn wallpaper. Her father sighed in his sleep, his face unlined for once. Grace sat beside him, letter in her lap, locket in her palm. Between loss and betrayal, a flicker of hope refused to die. And far away, in Boston. A line of code blinked on a screen in the IT office, an unnoticed trail leading toward truth. Justice is rarely swift. It moves slowly, collecting proof like stones until one day the weight can no longer be ignored. When it arrives, it demands not only facts but courage to speak the truth aloud, even before doubting eyes. At the Whitmore Foundation, an intern named Daniel quietly pieced together what others had overlooked. Late nights found him in the server room, the hum of machines his only company. He traced login times against building entry logs. He matched IP addresses to physical locations. The trail grew clear transfers had been made from Grace's account at hours when she was not even in the building. One timestamp in particular stood out. During the very moment the system showed Grace authorizing a transfer, she had been photographed leading a letter-writing activity at the nursing home. Dozens of witnesses could confirm it. The data carried its own fingerprint, pointing not to her, but to Gregory's private network. Daniel hesitated before bringing the findings forward. He was just an intern, a name few remembered, but truth mattered more than rank. He carried the files to Alex's office, voice shaking as he explained. Alex read the logs, each line striking like a bell. Relief mingled with anger. Relief that Grace's innocence had proof. Anger that he had not trusted sooner, that he had let her walk away under clouds of suspicion. "Good work," Alex said firmly. "This will not be buried." The next board meeting was packed. Gregory sat confidently at the table, expecting another routine defense. But Alex arrived with binders under his arm, the intern trailing behind him. "Before we proceed," Alex said, his voice steady, "I want the record to show these findings." He laid out the evidence server logs, security entries, witness accounts. The data was undeniable. Gregory's access had been hidden behind Grace's credentials, but the digital fingerprints pointed back to him with precision. Murmurs filled the room. Gregory paled, his practiced smile faltering. "This is nonsense," he snapped. "An intern's mistake," Alex cut him off. "No, it's truth. And this board will not protect deceit. We are transferring the file to the district attorney this afternoon." Silence fell, one by one. Board members nodded. The vote was swift. Gregory was suspended, pending investigation. For Alex, victory tasted hollow. He stood before the board and added quietly, "Grace Bennett was wronged here. Wronged by these accusations. Wronged by our silence. I take responsibility for not trusting my own judgment, for not defending her when it mattered most." The words cost him pride, but he welcomed the weight. Only honesty could repair what silence had broken. That evening, headlines shifted. Whitmore Foundation clears former employee. CFO suspended for misconduct. Grace's name was no longer tied to theft, but to resilience. Yet in Ohio, she read the news with mixed feelings. Vindication eased the sting, but it did not erase the weeks of doubt, the nights of fear, the sense of betrayal. She folded the newspaper and set it aside. Her father called her by the wrong name again that evening, and she chose not to correct him. She boiled soup, adjusted the lamp, and reminded herself that her life was here now, safe, if small. Meanwhile, Alex packed a small bag. In the drawer of his desk lay the locket, now repaired. He had taken it to a jeweler the week before, unable to explain why he cared so deeply about fixing it. The clasp closed smoothly now, polished silver catching the light. He held it in his palm, thinking of the night she had picked it up from the floor, of the gentleness in her touch. That memory had never left him. The flight to Ohio was quiet, the window showing fields buried under snow. As the plane descended, Alex felt his pulse quicken. He could present all the proof in the world, but repairing the wound between them would take more than evidence. Snowflakes drifted steadily as he drove to her town. Streets were lined with houses bowed under winter's weight. At last, he turned onto the lane where her home stood. Lights glowed faintly inside, and smoke rose from the chimney. He climbed the steps, each board creaking beneath his shoes. The porch light illuminated the old door, its paint chipped, its welcome honest. He paused, gathering breath. In his hand he carried the locket, repaired and gleaming softly. It felt like both an offering and a plea. The wind swept across the yard, carrying the smell of wood smoke. Alex raised his hand to knock, his heart steady but full. Justice had spoken in Boston, but here, in the quiet snow of Ohio, another kind of truth waited, the truth of whether love could mend what silence had broken. Love, when it matures, is not only a rush of feeling, it becomes a promise built from wood, screws, and the hours you willingly give to those who matter most. The winter sun was pale over Ohio, casting long shadows across the Bennett yard. Snow blanketed the ground, crunching under Alex's boots as he carried planks of lumber from his rental truck. Grace stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching in disbelief. She had expected apologies, maybe flowers. She had not expected tools and a toolbox. "What exactly are you doing?" she asked when she stepped outside, pulling her coat tighter. "Your father's chair needs a ramp," Alex replied, setting down the wood with a thud. "Steps make it hard for him. I thought I could help." Grace opened her mouth to protest, but the words stuck. She had spent weeks lifting her father up and down those stairs, straining her back, biting her tongue against frustration. Now, here was Alex, already measuring the porch with a carpenter's tape, as if the solution had been obvious all along. He worked steadily through the morning, sawdust scattered onto the snow, catching light like golden flecks. Grace brought him coffee in an old mug, then gloves when his hands reddened. Her father watched from the window, humming a tune from decades ago. By noon, the ramp stood firm, tested carefully with the wheelchair. Grace felt tears sting her eyes when her father rolled smoothly outside for the first time without struggle. Later, Alex climbed onto the roof with hammer in hand. Grace followed nervously, holding the ladder steady. The shingles were brittle, worn from years of storms. Alex replaced them one by one, his movements deliberate. Grace looked up at him against the winter sky, a man out of place in a billionaire's suit, but perfectly at home with hammer and nails. When he finally climbed down, cheeks flushed from the cold, Grace whispered, "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," Alex answered simply. That evening, as the lamp in her father's room glowed, Grace found Alex waiting in the backyard. Snowflakes drifted gently, catching in his dark hair. He held something small in his hand. "This belongs to you," he said, opening his palm. The silver locket gleamed softly, clasp mended, surface polished. Grace touched it carefully, remembering the first time it had slipped to the floor, how she had cleaned it with her scarf before returning it. Now it was whole again. "I thought it was lost," she whispered. "Not lost," Alex said. "Just waiting to be repaired, like some things in life." From his other pocket, he drew a small box, not velvet, not elaborate, just plain wood, sanded smooth, with hinges that clicked softly as he opened it. Inside lay a simple ring silver, unadorned, but steady. "I know this isn't the usual way," he began. "No ballroom, no headlines, just a backyard in Ohio. But I don't want spectacle. I want something true. I want to share your burdens, Grace, not lift them away, share them. I want to sit with you at hospital visits, cook soup when you're too tired, stand beside you in the work that matters. And if you'll let me, I want to promise all of that in front of your father, in front of anyone who cares to witness." Grace's breath clouded in the air. Her heart pounded not with surprise, but with a slow certainty she had not felt in years. The man before her was not a headline, not a name carved into buildings. He was the man who had built a ramp, hammered shingles, and thought about light for her father's sleep. Her throat tightened. "Alex, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure," he said. The snow fell thicker, muffling the world. Grace looked down at the ring, its simplicity steadying her. She remembered selling her wedding band to pay for medicine, thinking love was behind her. Yet here was another ring, offered not as escape, but as companionship. She nodded slowly, tears blurring her sight. Yes. Alex slipped the band onto her finger. It was cool at first, then warm as her skin adjusted. He closed her hand around the locket as well, binding past and future in one gesture. Behind them, the back door creaked. Grace's father shuffled out, blanket over his shoulders, eyes distant but smiling. "Daniel," he asked softly, mistaking Alex for the man long gone. Grace's heart ached, but Alex bent low, voice gentle. "No, sir. It's Alex, and I'll take care of her." Her father nodded, content, and retreated inside. Grace pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed. Alex drew her close, letting her lean against his chest. For a long moment they stood in silence, the snow covering their footprints as quickly as they made them. No crowd, no applause. Just two people and a promise shaped by effort and love. Later that night, Grace sat at the kitchen table, the ring catching the lamplight as she filled out paperwork. Not resignation letters this time, but plans for small community workshops. Ideas she and Alex had scribbled together on scrap paper. She realized they were building not only a life, but a mission. In the quiet, Alex placed his hand over hers. "There's a chapel in New England," he said softly. "Wooden beams, small windows, nothing fancy. Would you marry me there, with your father beside you?" Grace smiled through tears. "Yes, that's all I ever wanted." And so, beneath the winter sky of Ohio, with tools still scattered in the yard and soup simmering on the stove, the promise of a wedding began to take shape. Happiness, at its core, is a habit. It lives in the smallest rituals: an evening cup of tea, a medication chart stuck to the fridge, a corner shop where strangers pause long enough to write something kind for one another. The chapel in New England stood humble against the late spring sky. Wooden beams arched overhead, sunlight slipping through small windows. The scent of polished pine lingered in the pews. Grace walked down the aisle in a simple dress, the kind she had stitched herself, soft ivory falling to her ankles. Her father sat in the front row, his blanket draped carefully across his knees. He watched her with a smile, his eyes hazy but peaceful. Alex stood at the altar, his dark suit plain but dignified. When Grace reached him, he took her hand gently, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The vows they exchanged were short, yet steady. No grand declarations, no glittering spectacle, only promises of shared mornings, shared burdens, and shared laughter. When the service ended, their small circle of family and friends lingered outside beneath budding trees. The air smelled of earth and blossoms. Grace's father reached for her hand, whispering, "Beautiful," before dozing in his chair. That word, though fragile, carried the weight of blessing. Weeks later, Grace unlocked the door to a new space on a quiet Boston street. Above the entry, freshly painted letters spelled "Letter and Light." The shop was small but warm, its shelves lined with handmade paper and old type cases. At the back stood a sturdy letterpress machine, heavy with history, yet ready for new stories. "This is yours," Alex said as he helped her set the last box on the counter. "No," Grace replied softly, looking around. "This is ours, for the community." Within days, neighbors wandered in, some bought cards, some simply sat at the wooden tables and wrote notes. Grace placed a small basket by the door, labeled "Letters to Strangers." Slowly, the basket filled. People left words for anyone who might need them. "You matter. Keep going. Tomorrow can be brighter." In honor of his mother, Alex established a scholarship through the foundation funds for caregivers balancing work and love, named after the woman who had taught him compassion in her quiet way. Grace stood beside him at the launch, proud not only of him, but of the lives they were helping. Their home was modest compared to his penthouse, but filled with warmth. Evenings often found them in the kitchen, simmering chicken soup together, laughing when the noodles boiled over. The old bookshelf Grace had brought from Ohio leaned in the corner, stuffed with paperbacks. Some nights they planned projects for Letter and Light, sketching ideas on napkins. Other nights they simply sat side by side, Alex reading while Grace wrote letters to her father's nurses. Happiness did not come in sweeping waves. It came in the steadiness of their rhythm, in knowing someone else was watching the clock for medication. Someone else was ready to fetch tea after a long day. One afternoon, Grace inked the letterpress for its first official run. The machine groaned to life, pressing paper against type with satisfying weight. She pulled out the first card, ink still drying. The words read, "To the one who was tired, but kept going anyway. You made it here." She stared at the sentence, her chest tightening. She realized she had written it not only for strangers, but for herself, and perhaps for Alex as well, for the two people who had once nearly given up, who had been buried under grief and suspicion, yet still found light. She pinned the card above the counter. When Alex came in later, dust from the shop's shelves on his sleeves, he paused to read it. His eyes softened. Without a word, he reached for her hand. In that moment, Grace understood that joy was not a single event, not even a wedding day. It was the habit of noticing, of writing down encouragement, of sharing small warmths with anyone who might need them. Outside, the afternoon sun spilled across the street. Customers lingered with letters in their hands, leaving behind traces of kindness. Inside, the press clanked again, setting ink into paper, as steady as a heartbeat. And beneath it all, the two of them stood together, partners not only in marriage, but in the daily work of healing, proof that the smallest habits could become the brightest form of happiness. If you could do only one brave thing today, what would you choose? Would it be a step toward forgiveness? A phone call to someone you've been meaning to reach? Or perhaps a simple kindness that makes life gentler for you and for the person beside you? Grace and Alex's story began with something small, almost accidental, a misdirected email, a locket dropped on the floor, a moment in a bakery when a cup of tea was offered at just the right time, and, of course, one kiss soft, hesitant, yet brave enough to open the door to change. Their journey was not smooth. It wound through suspicion, betrayal, and the heavy silence of injustice. But what pulled them through was not wealth or headlines. It was respect. It was fairness. And above all, it was courage, the courage to believe again, even after the world had tried to teach them not to. That is what love looks like when it grows past infatuation. It becomes a choice, made daily, to honor another person, to build ramps in snowy backyards, to cook soup when exhaustion lingers, to repair broken things, lockets, trust, even parts of ourselves. Their marriage was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new rhythm. Grace's shop, Letter and Light, became a place where strangers wrote encouragement to one another. Alex's scholarship honored caregivers who often go unseen. Together, they proved that love is not grand gestures alone. It is habits, habits of kindness, of patience, of staying present. And what about us, listening to their story? Now perhaps you have carried a burden of your own. Perhaps you've cared for a parent, a spouse, or a friend through long nights and difficult mornings. Perhaps you've been mislabeled, misunderstood, or doubted. If so, you already know what Grace felt, and you already understand why her courage matters. So, let this be an invitation. Share with us your own small, brave moment. Was it speaking up when silence was easier? Was it sitting quietly by a hospital bed? Holding a hand? Was it choosing to love even when it hurt? These are the moments that shape not only relationships, but communities. They are the quiet acts that ripple outward, reminding us that dignity and compassion matter more than appearances. If Grace could stand here, she might say, don't underestimate your smallest gesture. Don't think a note on a refrigerator or a bowl of soup doesn't matter. They do. They change the air around you. They can even change a life. And if Alex could speak, he might add, never let fear or family pressure make you silent when truth is at stake. Choose fairness, even when it costs you. In the end, it is the only choice worth making. As you finish listening, I invite you to take part in this community. If their story moved you, give it a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Together, we can keep telling tales that remind us of what matters most. Because the title was never just about romance. Just One Kiss is also an image of every small act of courage, the first decision to be kind, to be fair, to take a step toward healing. That single moment can alter the course of a day or a life. So, perhaps your brave act today will not look like theirs. Perhaps it will be writing a note to your neighbor, calling your sister, apologizing, or simply choosing to rest when you've been carrying too much. Whatever it is, trust that it matters. As the snow continues to fall over Boston, Grace and Alex move through their days quietly cooking dinner, checking medication charts, pressing letters on thick paper. Their lives no longer belong to rumor or spectacle. They belong to each other and to the simple work of building a kind life. And here, on this channel, more stories wait to be told. Stories of love that heals, of families that endure, of second chances found in unexpected places. Stories rooted in the same city, shaped by the same truth that even in the busiest streets, hearts can still listen. So, stay with us. More is coming. And until then, may you find your own brave kiss, that one decision, small but real, that begins a kinder chapter in your life. Grace and Alex's journey reminds us that love is not built in moments of perfection, but in the ordinary choices we make every day. True connection grows not through wealth, beauty, or status, but through respect, patience, and courage. We all face seasons when the world misunderstands us, when silence feels safer than speaking up, when hope seems far away. Yet their story shows that healing begins with small, steady acts: a cup of tea, a repaired locket, a gentle word spoken at the right time. These quiet gestures may not change the headlines, but they change hearts. For those of us in later chapters of life, this is a reminder that it is never too late to love, to forgive, or to believe in kindness again. We may not build foundations or run companies, but we can still build bridges of compassion in our homes, families, and communities. In the end, courage is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like showing up for someone, cooking soup on a cold night, or choosing to trust again after being hurt. And often, those are the choices that leave the deepest mark. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and for letting Shining Stories be part of your day. If Grace and Alex's journey touched your heart, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who still believes in love and second chances. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that bring hope, healing, and a little light to everyday life.